Farah Show, and I'm Elizabeth Farah. We are talking about America First Immigration, and we're taking on the immigration industrial complex. And what is that about? That is about jobs, at the American economy, American jobs, and the American culture. And so, of course, I have with me the intrepid WorldNetDaily reporter extraordinaire, Amanda Bartolotta. Amanda, we're going to have some really important stories to talk about today.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the most important ones, I think, got written so far.
Yeah, this one just came out. We were going to start with our Microsoft story, your Microsoft story. But I said, let's first look at the one that just hit today. And I'm going to go ahead and have you introduce it. It's called on WorldNetDaily. Well, actually, they renamed it. And I think I liked your name better. Is it India's partnership leads to quiet displacement of U.S. professionals, and you originally had it, global influence and soft power, India's strategic influence on the U.S. immigration system. So jump right in. Give me an overview of what this story's about.
So this story kind of walks you through is, as Americans, whether you are personally affected by H-1B or not, or have heard about it or not, at the end of the day, I think we've all heard one way or another that there's been this message that there's some sort of skills shortage in the U.S. and that we need foreign workers to come here on these work visas to help America build out its technology, because technology is just going to require so many engineers now or in the future. And in order to compete with our competitors like China, that we need to import people here to help us compete with technology and remain as the technology leaders. And what this article kind of walks through is who is really pushing this narrative, why this narrative is not actually true, and not only that, how was the narrative supported in order to actually, come to fruition, because as much as they've been lobbying, that's as much as it's been happening in their favor, the people who are lobbying and trying to push this narrative. It hasn't been for the Americans who've been displaced or harmed getting to be protected and those programs being scaled back. It's always been to scale. And then what the article walks through
is to scale.
Why?
You mean to scale immigration or guest workers into the United States and offshoring to India primarily. It used to be China was number one, and now we have China 2.0, which is India. This has, of course, been going on for decades now, but right now we're working with the scaling of immigration and worker visas in the United States and the offshoring at scale of our industry, especially white-collar workers.
Right. And that's what this story is really unique on, is that most of the time that narrative does not compare the two. So when we're pushing for more H-1Bs, you're not hearing that what that is actually doing is also increasing the offshoring model. When you combine the two, and what you actually see and what the article walks you through is that those are hand in hand. And those that are lobbying for this, which is the India government, isn't really lobbying for more H-1B, although that is what they want. Because what that ends up doing is it becomes the vehicle to, expand that offshoring for those jobs. And what it does is it just creates this dependency on cheaper labor, because that's what it is. Whether you're importing it here, that's already, reducing wages. You're having to pay. You're getting to pay people less, and the story walks you through that. But then on top of that, now you've got these profit margins and expectations to continue growing these profit margins, which are just based off of cheaper labor. What's better than going even cheaper than offshoring? Because, overseas, you're going to be paying an engineer maybe $5,000 versus in the U.S., the standard is over $100,000. So it's continued profit growth. But what you're doing is you're not only taking away jobs from Americans here with your onshoring, but you are then offshoring those jobs as well. And nobody is really highlighting that those two are tied together hand in hand. And that's kind of what the article knows.
Because I think a lot of people are told, and especially lawmakers and policymakers are told, Well, if you bring skilled labor, it's always high skilled labor, into the United States to ameliorate your great shortages in, labor, the labor population, high skilled labor population, and even just your youth population. We're deficient in everything in America. India's coming along because India's a good Samaritan, and they're going to help our industry and our economy grow by bringing in Indian labor. But that is a story that is told, and the one of the key takeaways is supposed to be that then American industry will not offshore. Then that's not going to become a problem. Our factories or our offices, our companies won't be offshoring because we will have enough labor here. But what you're saying is that is not the case.
Correct. It's not the case. And what the article kind of really just talks about and kind of just walks you hand in hand of like, here's where this is what we've been told. And this is where, who's benefiting the most off of these programs, which it shows that over time, this program of, pushing for these, programs to expand, India is not only lobbying for that, but as you're seeing the offshoring, the foreign investment in India to continue to grow. And this was all built off of not only another country who's telling us and helping coordinate with these multinational enterprises that also do business in India, that you need our skilled workforce. But on top of that, what my research has done and what I try to cover and capture in this story is that they don't actually have a skilled workforce. They just have lots of people and lots of young people that they have to employ. And rather than have them continue to eat up their GDP, they need them to be contributing members of society to India by getting them employed. Well, they can't generate enough jobs, and especially not enough high-paying jobs. And a lot of their documents talk about this, where they can have, 2 or 3 workers doing the job of one person because they just don't have enough jobs. And that just drives down their wages. So again, they're consuming more than what they're producing as humans in India with a 1.4 billion population. And so they need the world to take their people and make them employable. But then they need those jobs to come back to India. And the more that gets invested in India, that's going to produce more jobs in India. So if these were to be cut off, like, for example, in 2020, when we closed the borders and we stopped issuing as many visas, India's GDP goes negative. It tanks. And what you see is that immediately after, the H-1B visas skyrocket. And we have, in that, I show the numbers in the article as you go through that when we expanded those back open, we also started expanding more offshoring, and we expanded more investment into India. I think it shows that in 2023, we issued for work visas over 400,000 standard H-1B, H-4, and L-1 visas to India to come here and work in our white-collar jobs. And what that also shows is that the employment rate from 2009, which was less than most other countries, is now in 2022, which is the most current data that I can unfortunately pull. It shows that they are not only the majority of where jobs are being offshored, but that they have more than quadrupled the amount of jobs that are being created in India from U.S. companies. And that ties perfectly into the H-1B visa being that vehicle to expand offshoring. It has never been about filling gaps. It's been about taking that cheaper labor and exporting it to another country. Same way as our manufacturing. Our manufacturers got addicted to cheap manufacturing costs. Now,
and that's really just to pause there for a moment, this addiction to cheap labor, when that was first tasted, that drug was around 1999 when we had the looming Y2K crisis. So the tech industry in America imported tens of thousands, I'm not sure how large the pool was, of cheap foreign labor, primarily from India, maybe some from China. And once they had the taste of how cheap labor could be hired, there were very few obligations. They could let them go on a whim, on a dime. They didn't have benefits. They didn't have any obligation whatsoever. So the cost was so inexpensive. And that was the beginning of the addiction to cheap labor, not merit-based labor, because I've spoken to the developers, the engineers that worked through that period, and they said it was really tough because they would have to redo the work 2, 3, 4 times, even more than that.
I lived that.
Yes, and you lived it too. So the reason that this counterintuitive churn or process happens, that you think you're filling the need for skilled labor in the United States because we're falling short of the numbers and of the quality. But in reality, it's about cheap labor. They bring the cheap labor in, and then they just transition them back to go even cheaper into India because housing costs are going to be cheaper in India and building costs are going to be cheaper in India, presumably. That's my assumption on that end. So then they just completely continue to expand, and who knows where that leads, because eventually it could mean that 90% of a company's workforce is in India. And 10% of the executives are sitting here in the United States, living in California, the life of splendor and luxury. But in the wake of that, in that journey, are the bodies or the lives or the careers, the hopes and dreams of Americans. So it's the immigration industrial complex is about jobs, careers, the economy. It's about our culture. We're going to become, if this continues, if we actually foolishly allow it to continue, we can stop this. We will become a nation that, instead of being known for this massive population of highly skilled blue collar and white collar workers, we're dissuading people from going into these positions and going into the education system to achieve those ends, because that future or that career, because if we have time, I will refer to a story that I posted on at X for the Wall Street Journal. And in that article, it said, because of this offshoring, it is dissuading students from pursuing careers in this particular field. If the jobs aren't going to be there. Let's continue
the amount of student debt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you can't even get a job to pay off that debt, and even then, if you end up in engineering, the wages have stagnated so much, it's going to take you your whole lifetime to pay off that student loan. So it's not a rewarding job at that point. Like, you're going to be paying off, like, just barely surviving, and you're going into an engineering degree, and that's supposed to be specialized skilled, and you should be paid for those special skills, only to come that the cheap labor has stifled our wages so much, if you're even lucky to get a job in it, because at this point, there's so many discriminatory hiring practices going on, which I've showed you, and many Americans, the proof of that, after applying to over 7,000 jobs that I knew were reserved for foreign workers, and only getting called for 5, all of which I never did get a job offer from, even though I only apply to stuff that I'm overqualified for in most cases. They're not actually trying to hire Americans right now. We have every disadvantage. And then on top of that, if you're an American graduate right now in engineering, you don't have the same advantage, and we've talked about this in the past, as the OPT people that are going to come in and take that OPT and that 15% tax write-off that you don't have to pay the same for domestic workers. They're going to get hired before you. And so what's the point? Why go through that whole process?
Well, not only that, it's a lottery or it's a crapshoot that, say you take the leap of faith, your dad was an engineer, you've always loved it, You decide to go to school. You rack up debt to become an engineer. You graduate. You don't get a leg up, like you just said. The optional practical training that they only offer to foreigners gives them the experience so that you can't even compete on the same level playing field because they've been given an entree into a job that is designed to give them experience in the United States at an American company. And you didn't get that job because you could not be in that optional practical training because you were just an American. But if you decide to go and you get into into a job at, say, as a chemical engineer in Houston, Texas, will you have that job in 5, 10, or 15 years, or will they decide to offshore your entire department, 2, 3, 5, 10,000 jobs, and then everything you've invested in is gone offshore? And not only that, you're competing for the same small job pool that's left over at other companies with your colleagues that, were part of the slash and burn firing. We've gotten off topic. It's the same topic, so interrelated. I want to just read a sentence or two from this brochure. CII is the Confederation of India Industry, right? And they're very, very closely involved in the Indian government pursuing their policies, but they set it up so that they are independent of the Indian government on paper so that they do not have to register in the same way
as a foreign agent.
Foreign agent, which makes no sense to me. But
other countries have the same type of setup as CII, and yet they're still registered as foreign agents. It's pretty interesting that CII is not obligated to.
Right.
But they sure love the profit tax write-off that they get.
Right. So they have a brochure out, and they're concerned, of course, about Americans' immigration and what they are calling is labor mobility. Now, I want everybody to hear this. Amanda uses a lot of acronyms. I'm going to try to break her of that. Because a lot of people...
It's the military. I can't. She told
Yeah, there you go. Yes, sir. But some of this vocabulary is very, very important. I may have mentioned this on other shows I've done, but when you hear the word mobility, you're thinking mobile phones. There's so many things that you want to be mobile in or to have that are mobile, but this is something that you are not going to like. Labor mobility is a code word, and all it means, it sounds like something that is free, that probably increases innovation. Labor mobility, it's about freedom, right? No, it's not. It's about enslaving Americans in the sense that Indian mobility, labor mobility, they want to ease the flow of workers into America, take out the speed bumps, reduce the regulation, reduce the oversight, reduce the requirements, reduce the transparency demanded so that you can verify that that piece of paper is actually a real diploma from a real college and not a diploma mill, that you really do have the experience, that this job is exactly what it was written to be or registered for an H-1B visa, that the job is an actual job and it has the correct requirements. All of these regulations that are in place to protect the sovereignty of America, the jobs of Americans, the economy of America, all those things are in place for the interests of Americans. And they want to dismantle that piece by piece. So this brochure is saying that they want to do these things above, review all of these categories of visas, and they want it to provide necessary stability to a high-skilled immigration regime. Not necessary stability to American workers in that they know that they have a job and they have a career in that field that they studied for. But we're to change our regulations to provide a necessary stability to high-skill immigration. And then it says at the end of this one page, they want to remove the strain recent regulations have placed on the smooth mobility, because the mobility of Indian workers is the key, of the skilled and talented workforce necessary, get this, to rebuild the U.S. economy. So India, heart in hand, in all of their great Samaritan goodness, they are wanting to help America rebuild our economy. And how are they going to do that? We offshored to China. That destroyed our economy. And now India is going to help us by onshoring all of its workers, displacing Americans and suppressing wages, and then offshoring those same positions to India later. But that's going to help rebuild the American economy. And then
manufacturing or technology. So then we still haven't brought our manufacturing back from China. So we're now just going to double hurt our economy by then losing our white collar jobs to India. Makes perfect sense. They're very kind.
You mentioned something that, and we're not going to go too deep into this offshoring right now, but I will just comment off of your point there that when Apple says they're going to move from China, one would assume they're going to move to the United States of America to employ Americans and to bring that American company's labor force, but the billions of dollars that they generate in the Chinese economy back to generating those billions of dollars in our economy. Instead, they want to move to India. How does it help us? And by the way, isn't it that is, you're always looking for proof in your reporting to show that, no, there is no, say, labor shortage in America for high-skilled workers in STEM. That's the key, is to always to prove your point. The question I'd say is, we've been told that, no, you can't bring manufacturing back to America. I mean, they are there. They've built factories. They've developed, industrial parks and everything. They're really there. They've invested billions there. But they can move to India. They can't move back to America because that's just impossible. But they can just move to India for cheap labor in India's economy. At the end, it says here, the governments of the U.S. and India must also consider a working group to handle ease of mobility again for highly skilled professionals. Who's going to be in that working group, Amanda?
Definitely, India policymakers and definitely CII. And I would for sure see the big tech companies being in there, which most of them already have global mobility teams. And that's usually some of the first advice I give some Americans that get laid off. Does your company have a global mobility team? Because if so, you're already on the chopping block. eBay has a global mobility team because their only job is to make sure that the globe is able to come into the U.S.
I see what you're saying. All right.
I always tell people, you're on the chopping block if there's a global mobility team, and
because they're set up to smooth the mobility of Indian workers into their company.
And not just India and anybody across the globe, but
sure.
As we show that, they make up 80% of the work visas, over that in some cases, that means that is most likely who's going to come here. And there's plenty of the global mobility team on the other side that are placed in India that have a regular recruitment that they do with the India universities. So that way there's always a pipeline of more workers whenever you have jobs that need to be filled. There's no reason to fill them with Americans. There are plenty of Indians to do it.
All right. Further down in this story, I was thinking that we would look, we're skipping over a lot here. You want to go to WorldNetDaily. Amanda's stories are always on the front page under a banner called America First Immigration. And we couldn't fit exposing the immigration industrial complex. But it's America First Immigration. So you'll always see 1, 2, or 3 of her stories on the front page. We may be expanding that block so that it will accommodate 5 and some of our videos as well. And we're going to be doing this every week now, probably releasing on Fridays, recording or live streaming on Fridays, recording on Thursdays or live streaming on Fridays. Anyway, you begin to go into, what next section would you like to go over in this story?
Well, talking about how I wrote this, which I rewrote this probably 20 million different times, and I didn't know if I should focus in on the trade aspect, the skill aspect, the whole thing about this is creating this narrative and how that narrative followed through and how those narratives have impacted Americans. So we start with just the overview of the whole narrative that we need foreign workers. And then it goes into India's youth strategy. With that, because they have the world's biggest population and claim to have the world's youngest population, they actually outline in some of the documents that I've linked into the article where they think that the West has too many older Americans. And they classify the older as 40, and that because they're in those 40s, you need younger people to come in because they're going to age out. So you're going to need more skilled workers. And because they have I think in one document I found, it said that they have 60% working age population, which is quite a bit when you have 1.5 billion, people. And they need those people to be in, because that's who's going to contribute to the GDP. And so they want to capitalize on having that large young population that are skilled and tell America and these employers that you need our skilled workers. And so that kind of leads into that narrative where they're saying that we have tons of young people, you hire them, they're skilled. And what you see the trends with U.S. is that now there's ageism that has been built in tech. And I include with the receipts, because I'm very big about showing the proof, the EEOC reports that show that older Americans in tech are being pushed out. And I say older, I mean, you're looking at age from 35 to 50. These guys still have half of their lives to go.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And
so
they're being pushed.
This is creating ageism in the United States, and I usually don't adopt that kind of language because it's been so abused. But in other words, you're saying the EEOC is saying that it's incorporating ageism, or it's bringing ageism in, because whatever the narrative is, the drumbeat narrative, we've got to have young workers. We've got to have young workers. We've got to have young workers. So we bring them in from India, and therefore our older workers, which are 35, 40, 45, 50 years of age, they're losing their jobs. What is happening with older workers? And they're also higher paid.
What you're seeing with these mass layoffs is the trends in their EEO1 reports of their demographic of age going down. Whereas in the past, it seemed that because they all wanted more skilled, more experienced workers, the hiring trend more trended towards the middle of the career employee. But now what you see with these mass layoffs is that they're the ones that are getting cut first. And it's the same thing with PIPs that I've seen across the board.
What is PIPs?
The performance improvement, because, Amazon and Microsoft and Google, Meta, all of them are known to be PIP factories. And it is a tactic. Get rid of your slow, and I've seen documents that talked about that, employees, in referring to your older employees.
They just label them as slow?
Yes, and getting your more loyal, aka H-1B, employees in the door. And I include the stats of how many H-1Bs are here and what is their age demographics making up those H-1B visas, which is primarily younger H-1B Indian nationals. That's what it is. And
what are the demographics? What does that look like?
If you scroll down to the article, Yeah, so you see that the majority, and it's broken up female and male, but you would see, as what you see is that 32%, if you add it together, are in that 30 to 34 range, and then you have 25% are in that 25 to 29 range. But what you don't see is that there's less than 1% that are above 45. Less than 11% that are in 40 to 44 range. And so,
well, the point is that they are sending over their youngest, and now a man or a woman that is a science, technology, engineer, or math trained, skilled worker is being pushed out by youth. And so we are moving from merit-based, because clearly we all know this. We who are over 60 know that you are not at your best at 25. You're not your smartest at 25. It takes a lot of experience, and you've experienced all the challenges, all the mistakes. You've learned how to work within a particular career or field, and experience is just worth gold. It's worth 2 college degrees. That experience is your continuing education. And if you've survived, if you've made it through, you didn't get fired when you were young, you made it through because you are good and you adapt well and you're an innovator and you come in on time and you're responsible and you communicate well in your teams and you're a team worker, but you're a leader as well. I mean, these are things that experienced workers bring to the table. That's called merit. But merit's being set aside for cheap labor.
It is.
But this is the narrative that they want. It's like fixing the narrative in your brain, in people's brains, so we start talking about it in that way. Just like best and brightest, even though America has the best and brightest, most Americans probably at this point actually believe that the best and brightest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are in India. Isn't that amazing? Because their economy doesn't reflect this. Their entrepreneurship doesn't reflect this. Their corporate giants don't reflect this. Their corporate giants are just grabbing hundreds of thousands. Cognizant employs 250,000 Indians and plus 50,000 in the United States. So Cognizant has done one great thing. They've gamed the American immigration system and learned how to get American companies to offshore for cheap labor. That is hardly building a new mousetrap. That is not inventing the internet or going to Mars or designing a new kind of battery or AI. It's not developing and perfecting AI.
Cognizant and TCS and Emphasis, all of these, Indian multinational enterprises are so ingrained and involved in the Indian government. It seems a little crazy that they come here, open up these companies, and they also lobby very heavily for H-1B visas.
It's the India lobby. By the way, Amanda's going to be coming out with the story exposing the India lobby. The India lobby is, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars that they spend in the United States in promoting the opening of borders, if you will, an industry to of America's industry to H-1B visa holders and OPT holders and, just the entire immigration industrial complex. India is in partnership with the elites in big industry, big commerce.
Correct. And politics. I read an Inside article that talked about how everybody wants to be on the India caucus because your pockets get thick. And it's so funny that McCormick just became second on the board for that. And he's pushing so hard for new H-1B. I bet his pockets got pretty thick with that India.
Who said their pockets become thick?
It was an insider talking about his career as an Indian, coming to America, becoming an American citizen, through the normal pipeline, talking about his experience being paid by India government to lobby. And he goes in to talk about the India caucus, and he compares it to other countries or other caucuses that are involved that lobby more fairly. So they lobby by holding our government accountable. If you're not, being fair, if you're not working to make sure that things are fair for that community, they try to hold you accountable for that using words or using reports versus India just pays their way. And so it becomes really profitable if you are on the India caucus to lobby for India. And it just so happens to be the largest caucus that we have in our politics. So it makes a little sense. Everybody's competing for that position because if you're not going down that path of wanting to be the president someday, you want to have that good rest and best investment in the end. And so I've been studying really closely and researching and investigating the whole enterprise of, lobbying for the India. Because at the end of the day, these programs don't help America. It is hurting America. It's hurting Americans. It's hurting our jobs, our technology, our cybersecurity, our safety. And all of it has done is drain America and propped India, who I guess now is the fifth largest economy. They've done nothing but grow. And here America is, and we're $1 trillion in debt. Not to mention, let's add all the USA stuff in there because India has been a beneficiary for that. So they're draining us multiple different ways. And yet every document that I've found with the CII, the Confederation of India Industry, talks about how our relationship with America is not that great because we don't let them freely have access to our or our visas, employment, that we still have some little veil of...
They need to work on our bad attitude.
Yeah, but they invest so much into us. So
I saw this, and that's another story I asked you to do for me. I give you... They have
a report called American Soil, Indian Roots. And they talk about all the different states that they benefit and, invest in. And then they talk about all the politicians who have all these nice things to say about India and the India multinational enterprises that are just offshoring the jobs anyways. And it goes into about how they contribute to our communities and do nonprofits. But as another report that I'm working on for you, and you're probably leading into this, what I am showing is the reverse report, where it's not just America soil and India roots, it's America economy going to India soil, and us being left not only jobless, but left, our economy has already been damaged. And I actually go by the numbers, and the numbers really are telling. While they're trying to
finish this story.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. We have to. We go
into this a little.
Everybody,
story.
I just want you to know this. We're new at this whole idea of live streaming, pretty much, and it is really hard to talk about this, and that's not an excuse. You will want us to hold ourselves to the highest standards. It's a conversation, but at the same time, it's really hard not to go off in so many different directions. And we're going to do our darndest to really become the best live streamers, and so that you can enjoy what you're hearing and be brought into it. And hopefully we'll be able to get your comments and start answering questions. But we're going to try to be disciplined. And I'm the worst of the worst, but I'm going to take us back to
this. You care. You care a lot. I care a lot. So we are passionate about this issue. And there's a lot to it.
We want to save America from the following. We can look at Marxism, which is wokeism in the United States. It's just a different veneer on the same old lie. Marxism is a threat in the United States. Communist, Marxist China is a threat in the United States. Those are easy to identify because they've been talked about for decades. Finally, actually, that's another story, but I won't go into it. I just did an interview, and he said that when he was in the military, just in 2017, until Trump came into office, you would be fired or disciplined if you put the word China and enemy or adversary in the same sentence. That's literally what's happening in the U.S. military. So the idea that the military, the federal government, state governments, industry, just everyone that's involved in national security of the United States, our economic health, and all the issues that we face, that they can't be deceived and duped into enabling something that is mission critical destruction to the United States of America. Only in 2017, we were still being told, or our men in uniform were still being told, you cannot call China an enemy or an adversary, or you're out. And my point that I just went off of is there are different kinds of threats. We can have the threat of kinetic war. We can have, well, there's so many threats, but I'll just name two. One can be kinetic war. One can be the importation of corrosive ideologies and through our university systems and destroy the hearts, minds, and souls of American people and our culture through our education system. That is a non-kinetic war in the United States. But one that we are chiefly concerned with is the non-kinetic war that India is waging against the United States. And that is a war that includes propaganda, manipulation, gaslighting, because you have to agree to it.